A shocking assertion has settled at the center of public debate. Behind the luminous image of one of Asia's most powerful entertainment industries, there may exist a rigid, silent, and sophisticated mechanism that determines every step of those attempting to achieve fame. This declaration, which at first glance seems exaggerated, has become the starting point of an investigation that continues to reveal tensions, contradictions, and voids that the public is still trying to comprehend. In the midst of this storm, a name emerges with disconcerting weight, not for his statements, but precisely because of his silence. The figure of Xin Qi, director of one of the most influential talent management companies, has become the epicenter of a question that continues to expand within media and social circles. As preliminary reports spread, the story of Yu Menglong began to acquire a disturbing dimension. His professional trajectory, marked by a mixture of artistic aspirations and structural pressure, became enveloped in a contractual framework that numerous specialists describe as excessively restrictive. Although the entertainment industry is known for its demands, the magnitude of the controls, internal rules, and economic dependence that emerged around his figure initiated a debate that surpassed the limits of the strictly professional. What began as the story of an artist on the rise transformed into a case that questions the mechanisms of power operating behind the curtain. The first leaks presented a set of steps, supposedly designed to ensure discipline and performance, which later became the subject of broad interpretations. There was talk of a selection system, inflexible contractual ties, and private spaces where psychological pressure and the loss of autonomy seemed to intertwine. Although these claims require independent verification, what is evident is the magnitude of the impact they produced on public opinion. The case ceased to be an isolated episode and began to be reinterpreted as a reflection of structural tensions affecting numerous young people seeking an opportunity in a highly competitive realm. Xin Qi, whose position at the head of the company should make him a key source of clarity, has opted not to speak out. His silence has become a narrative element in its own right, generating speculation and renewed questions about the connections, interests, and decisions surrounding Yu Menglong. The absence of an official version has not stopped the scrutiny, but has intensified it, driving new lines of investigation and reactivating old records that had previously gone unnoticed. But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms really drive this crisis? We will analyze every detail, from the initial errors to the irreversible damages, to see how the world of entertainment functions and how an icon is redefined. From the very moment the case came to light, the figure of Xin Qi began to acquire a disturbing presence in the public debate. His name, which until then appeared linked to market strategies, audiovisual campaigns, and high-impact business decisions, came to occupy a different space, one where commercial logic intertwined with questions about power, influence, and control mechanisms. The company he led, recognized for shaping the careers of numerous emerging artists, operated in a terrain where discipline and speed were essential. However, the way those structures functioned internally remains a subject that specialized sources attempt to decipher with caution. The story of Yu Menglong reopened all discussions about the contracts that govern the lives of young talents. The pressure to stand out in a saturated market forces thousands of aspirants to accept agreements that limit, at different levels, their creative, financial, and even personal autonomy. In this context, the bond between you and the company acquired special relevance. Early investigations revealed a web of extensive clauses and exhaustive monitoring that aroused the concern of diverse analysts. Although this practice is not exclusive to a single company, the degree of dependence described by some leaked documents generated a profound debate regarding the balance of power in the industry. Xin Qi, due to his position as director, oversaw a system intended to guarantee the consistency of the artists under his management. The need to protect investments, coordinate schedules, and strengthen the corporate brand justified a series of internal measures that, over time, ceased to be perceived as simple commercial strategies. The implementation of strict controls, performance surveillance, and constant behavioral evaluation progressively shifted the focus toward a more sensitive terrain, that of individual freedom within an ecosystem where public image is the most valuable resource. Yu's trajectory, marked by a rapid rise followed by a prolonged stage of tensions, reflected those structural contradictions. Reports indicate that, since his selection in a televised contest, he was considered an attractive profile for massive exposure projects. His stage presence and his ability to connect with the audience sparked interest among various departments of the company. However, behind that initial illusion, pressures began to take shape that exceeded those customary in an artistic training process. The constant search for perfection, added to the fear of losing opportunities, generated an emotionally demanding environment that affected not only you but also other young people undergoing similar processes. Various sources describe a system composed of stages that, in principle, intended to structure professional development. The initial selection evaluated the aspirant's commercial viability. Then, the contract fixed the obligations and work parameters that would supposedly guarantee coherence with corporate objectives. Subsequently, inclusion in private activities destined to create bonds with investors and those responsible for different projects opened doors, but also imposed an emotional level difficult to manage. The following phases, centered on the demonstration of discipline, could generate episodes of tension that left artists in a state of significant fragility. Although these stages have not been independently confirmed, their description circulated widely on social networks and in international media, becoming a reference point for understanding the internal pressure that many young talents go through. Yu Menglong began to show signs of emotional exhaustion when expectations grew disproportionately. His attempts to comply with every demand clashed with the rigidity of a system that seemed not to contemplate failures or doubts. Leaked testimonies attribute to Yu moments of anguish, prolonged silences, and an internal struggle between the desire to continue advancing and the need to reclaim spaces of autonomy. Several specialists in entertainment dynamics point out that these tensions are common in industries where public exposure becomes an indicator of value. However, the intensity described in Yu's case raised questions about the capacity for emotional containment within the corporate structure. Xin Qi, for his part, appears in the accounts as a strategist who rarely left room for improvisation. His leadership style, oriented toward results and sustained by a wide network of contacts, turned the company into a dominant force. Nevertheless, that same organizational capacity transformed into a focus of scrutiny. The absence of public declarations by the director generated more interpretations than certainties. His silence has been analyzed as a cautious strategy or as a sign that the case possesses ramifications not yet revealed. As these pieces began to connect, the public started to wonder if Yu's story symbolized something deeper than a contractual conflict. For many, it represented the emotional portrait of hundreds of young people navigating between hope and fear within an industry that promises visibility but demands constant sacrifices. In that collective mirror, Yu's figure ceased to be an isolated case and transformed into the core of a debate on the limits of power and the fragility of those who aspire to excel in a highly competitive environment. What do you think about this? Comment down below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. The media explosion that followed, the first leaks, transformed the case into a phenomenon of international scope. What initially seemed like a controversy, limited to a small group of entertainment figures, turned into an open discussion about the mechanisms governing the construction of contemporary idols. Social networks reacted with dizzying speed. Every detail, every statement, every silence fueled a collective narrative that advanced without pause, as if the public were attempting to fill the voids left open by the absence of official information. In this scenario, the figure of Yu Menglong went from being that of a developing artist to that of a symbol, provoking divergent interpretations according to the perspective of each spectator. A part of the public adopted the view that Yu had become trapped in structures exceeding his control. The emotional fatigue conveyed by certain leaked fragments, combined with his reserved gestures in public appearances, reinforced the perception that he was under excessive pressure. These sectors of the audience not only expressed support, but demanded clear answers regarding the criteria companies use to manage the lives of artists. Yu's story was reinterpreted as a mirror of the frustrations experienced by other young people trying to thrive in a market where fame can generate opportunities, but can also enclose people in restrictive structures. Another group, conversely, manifested caution. They underscored that the available data came from unconfirmed sources and that any hasty conclusion could distort the facts. For this sector, the lack of verifiable documentation demanded a more prudent analysis. They considered it necessary to wait for official pronouncements that would guide the understanding of the case, highlighting that the entertainment industry is an environment where narratives are easily amplified and require careful contrasting. These two currents of interpretation created a visible division that further fueled public discussion. Meanwhile, the internal repercussions for the company became evident. International attention generated unease among investors who traditionally backed high-visibility projects. Some collaborations that were in the initial phase were put on pause while the parties reviewed potential reputational implications. These types of reactions are habitual when a scandal acquires public relevance, as brands seek to protect their image before a public increasingly demanding of the values it supports. Preliminary reports indicate that certain promotional campaigns planned for the quarter were rethought, not due to confirmation of facts, but due to the climate of uncertainty surrounding the case. The tension was also reflected in the behavior of the public during events associated with the company. Some followers began to display banners requesting transparency, while others defended the company's trajectory as an organization capable of launching numerous talents to stardom. This polarization not only affected external perception, but also influenced the internal morale of employees. Sources close to the matter described an environment marked by secrecy, where every public statement was evaluated with extreme care to avoid erroneous interpretations. Within this climate, the figure of Xin Qi reappeared as a crucial element. His prolonged silence generated a paradoxical effect. The more he avoided speaking out, the greater the attention he attracted. The media began to review past interviews, executive profiles, and corporate records in search of clues that would allow an understanding of the decision-making structure in the company. However, none of these approaches managed to offer a conclusive explanation. Every attempt to build a definitive narrative ended up returning even more questions to the public space. The dissemination of testimonies from residents of remote areas who claimed to have found human remains in mountainous zones added an additional layer of unease to the debate. Although these declarations emerged in a context distinct from Yu's case, the temporal proximity intensified suspicions among those who interpreted all elements as part of the same power structure. Nevertheless, specialists in media analysis recalled that the automatic association of unverified facts can distort the understanding of each case. They highlighted the importance of contextualizing accounts and avoiding hasty generalizations that could hinder formal investigations. The absence of answers from authorities generated diverse interpretations. For some, institutional silence was an indication of the case's complexity. For others, it was a sign that there were informational limits unknown to the public. This communication void became the ideal terrain for multiple theories to prosper. In an environment where information circulates with unprecedented speed, the public tends to reconstruct reality through scattered fragments, even when those fragments possess no independent validation. As the narrative expanded, the figure of Yu Menglong consolidated as an emotional reference point. Old photographs, contest recordings, and messages published before the scandal began to recirculate as fundamental pieces for understanding his trajectory. Followers analyzed his posture, his tone of voice, and his silences as hidden signs of persistent malaise. Although these interpretations may reflect a human need to find meaning, they also pose the difficulty of reconstructing an individual's personal experience from an external perspective. Digital platforms became the main stage of the debate. Posts defending the need to thoroughly investigate the case coexisted with others warning about the risk of fueling unverified accusations. Algorithms intensified this polarization by amplifying content that generated greater emotional interaction. The discussion, far from stabilizing, evolved in multiple directions, each sustained by a combination of fragmentary data, collective perceptions, and legitimate concerns about the limits of institutional power. In the midst of this narrative expansion, the case ceased to be exclusively a personal or business matter. For many observers, it transformed into a profound questioning of the functioning of industries that depend on the public image of their artists. The pressure, competitiveness, and need for immediate results outlined a landscape where the emotional vulnerability of young talents became a central theme. The story, reinterpreted from these tensions, opened a space for collective reflection on the price sometimes paid to achieve visibility. What do you think about this? Comment amen below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. The narrative reached its tensest point when analysts began to reconstruct Yu Menglong's final months with a closer look. His public presence had diminished progressively. Appearances that previously transmitted energy and determination were replaced by brief interventions, restrained gestures, and gazes that seemed to get lost in an inner silence difficult to decipher. Several observers described this stage as a period marked by an intimate struggle, a kind of accumulated tension that found no clear space to be released. In the midst of this fragility, his professional trajectory continued advancing with the inertia of commitment, but without the genuine vibration that had characterized his early years. The pressure intensified when certain documents, until then unknown, began to circulate among journalists and experts in contractual analysis. These files, whose authenticity had to be examined with caution, offered a more complex view of the obligations Yu allegedly maintained with his company. The clauses described a scenario where every decision, every movement, and every opportunity was conditioned by a network of commitments demanding absolute dedication. The extensive character of these provisions generated an avalanche of interpretations, many of them centered on the possible psychological impact that such a rigid system could exert on a young artist in full training. The darkest point of this journey appeared when a recording, presumably associated with Yu, began to replicate on digital platforms. Its origin was not verified, and specialists insisted on the need to analyze it with prudence. However, the emotionality it transmitted captivated the audience. A broken voice was heard, speaking of years of pressure, of constant warnings, and of a sensation of confinement that seemed to drag on from time past. Beyond its veracity, the content of this recording acted as an emotional catalyst. Yu's image ceased to be that of a young competitor and went on to become a symbol of silent resistance within a structure that many spectators considered impenetrable. In parallel, stories began to emerge about moments of tension between those directly responsible for his management. Some sources described intense meetings where objectives, performances, and expectations were discussed. These versions painted a picture in which Yu attempted to express his limits while the company sought to maintain its production pace. The lack of an effective communication channel would have generated an emotional distance difficult to bridge. While the public tried to decipher these dynamics, the story acquired an increasingly introspective tone, centered on the feelings of exhaustion and vulnerability that run through many young artists subjected to demands for immediate success. The climate reached its critical point when certain media reported on internal tensions that had allegedly arisen among the high ranks of the company. According to these publications, there were discrepancies regarding the way to manage the case and the form in which public scrutiny should be addressed. Although there were no official statements confirming these versions, the idea of internal disagreement further deepened the perception of instability. For the public, the absence of clarity reinforced the notion that there were elements of the case remaining hidden that could completely modify the understanding of the account. The situation changed abruptly when an independent source published a set of documents that, although requiring verification, offered a different view of the conflict. These files detailed a series of financial movements, strategic decisions, and internal reorganizations that allowed for interpreting Yu's relationship with his company from a more institutional angle. For many observers, this discovery represented a turning point. The story ceased to center solely on the emotional experience of an artist and began to be situated within a broader context, related to the general structure of the entertainment industry and to the tensions that emerge when control systems exceed the capacity of individuals to manage them. International media resumed the case with renewed interest. Diverse reports began to analyze the implications this situation could have in other Asian markets, where restrictive contracts are a habitual part of the training process for new talents. Experts in labor law and media psychology offered perspectives that enriched the debate, highlighting the need to review training models and corporate demands that, in some cases, can generate disproportionate emotional tension. This discussion, far from resolving use case, turned it into a benchmark for evaluating the risks faced by young artists entering highly competitive circuits. One event marked the final phase of this process: the appearance of a document technically analyzing the decision structure within the company. This report, prepared by a group of external consultants, did not mention Yu directly, but did describe internal flows, hierarchical responsibilities, and the mechanisms regulating the formation of new artists. For analysts, this document allowed for the understanding that conflicts could not be attributed solely to individual decisions, but also to a system that gave absolute priority to results. The interpretation of this report generated a debate on the need for policies that safeguard the emotional well-being of developing artists. The case began to acquire a different nuance. Yu's figure, which had been analyzed from the perspective of personal tragedy, began to be represented as an example of what can happen when pressure, expectation, and lack of containment combine in an environment demanding constant performance. The discussion shifted toward shared responsibility among institutions, agents, and corporate structures. The idea that the industry needs clearer rules and external oversight became a central point of the public conversation. In this last stretch of the analysis, the story was no longer perceived exclusively as a conflict between an artist and his company, but as a reflection of an ecosystem that, in pursuing financial success and the expansion of its image, can forget the human dimension of those who sustain it. The search for a balance between discipline and emotional care presented itself as an urgent necessity to prevent similar episodes from repeating in the future. What do you think about this? Comment and below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. When the intensity of the debate began to diminish, a landscape marked by the silent consequences this case left behind came into view. The story of Yu Menglong, far from fading with the passage of time, remained as a reminder of the profound tensions running through those who seek to build a career in a competitive and highly regulated environment. The company, whose name was associated for weeks with incessant scrutiny, initiated a process of internal reorganization to review practices, clarify responsibilities, and offer greater stability in the training of its artists. These types of adjustments, although habitual after episodes of high media exposure, revealed an attempt to regain public trust and adapt to a model more sensitive to the human needs of its talents. The entertainment industry also experienced a broader movement. Various agencies began to examine their management protocols, conscious that public perception had become more critical and demanding. Conversations about emotional well-being, contractual transparency, and limits on supervision acquired an unusual degree of relevance. This debate, which previously seemed restricted to specialists, moved to the center of social discussion. Thus, Yu's case acted as a turning point, leading multiple institutions to reflect on the balance between professional discipline and psychological protection. Although the transformation of an industry is a slow process, the simple fact that these questions have entered public discourse signals significant progress. The deepest lesson this story leaves is the need to recognize that behind every artist exists a person facing complex pressures, often invisible to the public. The shine of the stage does not eliminate the doubts, fears, or internal contradictions that arise when one's image becomes a commercial value. Yu's trajectory invites consideration of the importance of building spaces where emerging talents can express their concerns without fear of repercussions. It also reminds us that success should not be measured solely by visibility, but by the ability to preserve emotional integrity in the midst of excessive expectations. The case demonstrates that society needs more solid tools to understand how power structures operate in industries where fame can elevate or fragment a person in a matter of moments. The narratives that surged around Yu reveal the speed with which public opinion formulates explanations and the importance of having precise information, allowing for the fair interpretation of facts. From this reflection arises an essential question: how to ensure that future artists find a more balanced environment, capable of offering opportunities without shattering their well-being. Looking toward the future, it is likely that we will see an increase in initiatives oriented toward strengthening the emotional protection of young talents and demanding greater clarity in contractual relationships. The evolution of this case will continue to influence these discussions, not as a closed story, but as a warning about the challenges posed by the pursuit of success in a realm where every decision is amplified before the public gaze. Transformations will not be immediate, but every step in the direction of a more conscious industry represents significant progress. The conversation remains open for those who wish to delve deeper, question, or contribute new perspectives. The value of this analysis lies in its capacity to generate collective reflection and to illuminate aspects of a reality that on many occasions remains hidden behind the spectacle. Do you want us to continue exploring other cases, profiles, or controversies in the world of entertainment? I am here to accompany you in every story you decide to discover.